fáilte chríal ar ais go Gaelic song stories and pod chrúlach fan an bimishe Deirdre Grahamach a thuirst súil in ar scialachgan ir cúlach na náran. Hello and a very warm welcome back to Gaelic Song Stories with me, Deirdre Graham. Throughout this podcast series, I will be looking at more stories and themes behind Scottish Gaelic songs. As a Gaelic singer myself, I have a lifelong affinity with the songs and stories that surrounded me growing up, which have been transmitted through the oral tradition and more recently in recordings and collections. These stories echo across the Highlands, and as I delve into them, I want to take you on a journey to explore the Scottish Sgàthach and highlight the continuing relevance of these songs. I'll be interviewing some wonderfully knowledgeable guests, each of whom have a keen interest and expertise in several different areas, including war, piping and political struggles, all with a good smattering of humour. This week I had the delight of chatting to the fantastic Rachel Walker. Rachel is a singer, songwriter, arranger and educator based in the heart of Lochaber in Scotland's beautiful West Highlands. At home with both Gaelic and English, she encountered the Gaelic tradition at a young age after her family moved from Lincolnshire in England to the small village of Kinlochhew in Wester Ross, and she soon fell in love with the songs, language and culture of the Gael. Collaboration has been at the heart of Rachel's musical journey, through performance groups to writing partnerships, and she has recently co-penned an album, Despite the Wind and Rain, that celebrates 10 women in Scottish history that are too often overlooked. These new songs give voice to their stories and bring a new perspective to light. In this episode, we take a look at two of these songs, delving into the lives of Sgàthach, the revered warrior queen, and Gormshùil, the most powerful witch of all. We bring together some of the folklore that surrounds these stories, and more importantly, Rachel's fresh perspective on these remarkable women. I hope you enjoy. Well, hello.
Hello.
Fáilte, Rachel.
Tapalat.
Thank you so much for chatting with me today.
You're welcome. It's lovely to get a chance to chat.
It's a subject that's dear to your heart.
It is actually, yep, it is. So I'm looking forward to kind of going into a little bit more depth than I usually get a chance to do.
Good. Well, so am I. I suppose this is a little bit different from other conversations I've had before, whereas usually I would start with an old song and then see what's behind it. But actually in this case, there weren't, I was going to say are no songs, or weren't any songs, and you've actually composed them as the result of the stories. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, yeah. I think the songs that we're going to talk about are part of an overall project which we're kind of looking into women's achievements, and these two particularly did draw on a lot of folklore and kind of legend and history that was really interesting to look at a little bit more closely. Yeah.
So the folklore and the history, the stories behind them are pretty well known, particularly with the first one, particularly in Ireland. It's a bit of a staple story in Ireland, but well known here in Scotland as well. So it is quite surprising that there are no old songs from kind of in praise of these women.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's kind of a point of interest, is that when you look at the stories and how they're written, they are written by men, for men. Yeah. So a lot of the time the focus becomes really male orientated rather than looking at it from a female perspective, or even exploring the female voice. So that was kind of, it was one of the challenges really of the project, when you look back at history and what's written about different people, from what perspective that's written. And most of the time it is from the male gaze or the male perspective, which totally changes the way that certain characters are reflected. And I think in the case of Sgàthach in particular, that was something that was quite challenging when it came to writing about her rather than writing about everybody around her.
But it's potentially, it's almost like that light bulb moment of, everything is under the male gaze here, and maybe quite refreshing and liberating to go, I'm going to do something, I'm going to create something that that takes another angle and a woman's perspective for a woman as well. It should be that way.
Absolutely, and I think that was the one thing that I felt was missing, was the female voice. And actually, what was she all about? Why did she do the things she did? And she was more about balance rather than, she was responsible for training these warriors that came from Ireland and from Scotland to kind of receive the best training. She was pretty fierce. She had all these things going on for her. But also she taught balance. So she taught when not to fight, when to fight, all the kind of connection with the land, the so much symbolism around her fortress and the crossing over the bridge to be trained. Was that crossing from birth to death? Was, all these things that you kind of, that made me look at her slightly differently. And it was difficult. I worked with Marcus McIntourna on the lyrics for this. And I think we had probably 3 or 4 attempts at this before we got it right.
And really? Uh-huh.
I just found it really difficult. And eventually I went to see her fortress. Oh. And it is such a powerful place. But there's that there's an archway over the sea, and the situation of it with kind of sitting on the shoreline, but you're looking across to the Cuillins and the kind of the sea all around. It was so windy.
Does that still exist?
Yes, the archway is still there.
So you could go over it?
You can't really cross it. It's a little bit broken.
Okay.
I did look at it. I thought, no, I'm not brave enough. I'm sure some people would be really brave enough to go across.
I've just got a memory of being in high school and doing art and having a sketchbook. I've seen it from afar, and I've got a wee sketch of it in a notepad somewhere, but I've never actually been there.
It's so worth a visit. It's such Amazing. A powerful place, and I think that really helped to kind of just formulate the idea behind the song, and the kind of realisation that no, it had to be her voice and it had to be about her power, and that sometimes you're taking a little bit of a leap of faith, or maybe some poetic license into kind of thinking about what her psyche must have been, but yeah, it was really, really interesting to do and really enjoyable.
Cool. Okay, I'm going to. The irony is, I am going to talk from the male perspective and fill people in on the kind of folklore side. This is a great big story in the Ulster cycle, one of the 4 cycles in Irish mythology and literature, medieval literature. I think at the first time the stories appear in text is about medieval times, but it's said to have been set about Christian times.
That's right,
kind of 2,000 years ago, give or take.
Yes.
A few hundred years. So I am unfortunately going to fill in the gaps from Cuchullin's point of view.
But I think it's interesting to do that, because then it kind of helps to understand, how the story kind of circulates Sgàthach rather than focuses on her. Yeah.
Cool. So this is a story that will be well known, like I say, over in Ireland. And I'd say it's pretty well known. Cuchullin's pretty well known in Scotland. But I'll give my own rendition of the story behind Cuchullin. So I mentioned already it's part of the Ulster cycle, one of the 4 cycles of ancient Irish literature and folklore. Now, Cuchullin was actually born, his name was Satanta when he was born, and he was the son of a god called Lugh. I'm not quite sure of my Irish pronunciations. If anybody's listening, they can correct me. And his mother was Deirdre. I'm not quite sure either. And she's reported to have been the sister, or in some versions, the daughter of Conchobar, the King of Ulster.
Yes.
So he came from high, very good stock, and I'm sure was well revered. And it's said that in his youth he was absolutely beautiful boy and young man, and he was, in fact, he was so beautiful that people were worried. I mean, here's the first red flag, right? People were worried that if he didn't marry, that he would go off with all their wives.
Wow. Okay.
So, because of his charm and beauty and all his other positive, say that with a pinch of salt, but his other kind of attributes, he would steal their wives or their daughters. And so apparently they searched all over Ireland for a wife for him, a suitable wife. But he had fallen in love with Emer, who was the daughter of Feargal Monarch. But Feargal was not in favour of this match.
Yeah.
I think he could have been a little bit wise.
Maybe he knew something.
He might have seen these red flags. However, poor Cúchulainn. Well, I don't know. I might take that back in a minute. So that's Cúchulainn, and that's the starting point for him. So Emer's father was opposed to this match.
Yes.
Right. And she tried to fob him off. He tried to fob him off and sent him to Scotland to train under Sgàthach.
Yes.
For 7 years, perhaps?
For 7 years, yes.
7. So there's something about the number 7, isn't there?
Always.
So he went to train at Sgàthach's training academy for warriors. And that was in Skye, the fortress that you mentioned, near Tasgadh.
That's right.
Just north of Tolkavig on the Isle of Skye.
Yes,
yeah. Not far from me. I should have been there.
You need to go. Yes. You definitely need to go. It's worth it.
And so on the one hand, I kind of feel like that's testament to Sgàthach's prowess. Oh, send her there. That's kind of speaking to Sgàthach's accolades and how well regarded she must have been.
Absolutely. And I think it's quite interesting as well when we talk about it and we look at Cúchulainn and his image and how beautiful he was and all these things, and there's nothing written about what Sgàthach looked like. We don't get a description of her or what she looks like. We get a description of her methods of teaching and what she does, and her amazing use of the barbed spear, the ga bollock that she threw with her feet and had to be cut out of people because it was barbed. Once it got in there was no coming out of it. But there's not much about kind of her image or what she looks like.
That's really interesting because so many Gaelic songs are so descriptive.
Yes.
Whether it's the flowing locks or the eyes and whatever, however they're described, that's a really important part in Gaelic song.
Yes, yeah.
Is that kind of image.
Yep.
Okay. Anyway, right, so Cúchulainn went to Skye, to Sgàthach's fortress, and trained there for 7 years. And apparently he was on a par with her skills and was a very impressive warrior.
Yes.
Now, while he was there, bearing in mind, so Feargal, Emer's father, had kind of, there's another line of thought where perhaps if he went there for 7 years, he'd forget about the relationship with Emer, or perhaps he would perish when he was there, I don't know. And so that it almost delayed or skirted around this issue of him marrying his daughter.
Yes, he was definitely out of the way.
Yeah, and we'll see later that he did come back to Emer, but maybe out of sight, out of mind might have worked to some effect because Cúchulainn wasn't exactly well behaved.
No.
When he came to Skye. This is awful. I know you can't apply 21st century morals to something that happened 2,000 years ago, but he entered into a relationship with Sgàthach's daughter. Do you know her as Sgàthach?
Yes.
Yeah. She guarded the fortress, and so he had to duel with her, and then apparently he was dueling with her, accidentally chopped off her fingers, and then And then he kind of tried to make it up to her, and she called out for her husband, Cochar Creve, to come to her aid, and then Cuchulainn then disposes of him, and to try and make it up, he then enters into a relationship with Sgàthach.
Yes, it's all very complicated.
But it gets more so.
Yes, absolutely.
Because Sgàthach's arch enemy, in some versions of the story, was her sister Eva. In some versions, it's a rival clan. But Eva also had a relationship with Cuchulainn and bore him a son. And then I have read that he also had a relationship with Sgàthach herself when he finished his training.
Yeah, and there's also symbolism around that. If you look at kind of more female kind of imagery and kind of symbolism, if you like, of the mother, daughter, sister. So that's the kind of the female trinity rather than the male trinity. So there is kind of, I think there's a question somewhere in there whether they are all versions of the same person, and whether that's kind of, there's elements of those three, mother, daughter, sister, the cycle of life, all of those things in amongst that, which I found quite interesting as well.
Wow, right, okay, because that's one of your lines in the song.
Yes.
Yeah, right, and I had wondered what that trinity was. Oh, that's really interesting. Okay.
Yep.
So, maybe I shouldn't take it so literally as Cuchulainn just
did his thing. But I mean, I think that, again, that comes back to being written from a male gaze, the way he looked at, he was brilliant, he had this woman, he had that woman, he did the other woman, but actually, when you look at it more closely in terms of feminine symbolism and female history, perhaps, we quite easily look at the Holy Trinity or the masculine Trinity, Father, Son, Brother, Father, Son, Holy Ghost, however you want to look at it. But in terms of women and women's power, there's definitely something in that, I think, that kind of was interesting. And I actually spoke to a healer when I was doing some research for both this song and the other one we're going to talk about, and she was really interesting in the way that she was able to kind of interpret some of these symbolisms and kind of the connection with nature, balance, mother, sister, daughter, all of these kind of feminine things that used to be celebrated but aren't anymore. I think with Christianity, we moved away from celebrating kind of more female powers that were just there. They were part of being a woman, but now we've kind of lost those because that focus is definitely not there and it's not encouraged anymore. And that kind of all feeds into the label of a witch and things like that, which came later. But yeah, really interesting, I think.
That's so interesting. Wow, cool. Right. Let's go back to the story a little bit. And we'll get to the end of his kind of training and he goes back to Ireland. But apparently at this point, Aoife was pregnant with his son and he returned to Ireland to go and marry Emer, but Fergal was still refusing the marriage. And so he retaliated by storming his fortress and killing 24 of his men. And Fergal himself is said to have fallen from the ramparts and he died as well. And so I suppose the way was clear for Cuchulainn to marry Emer.
Yes.
Now, there's something I want to kind of make mention of them, off on a tangent. But one thing that I read said, Conchabar, who I'm wondering if is the same Conchobar. That's maybe his grandfather or uncle, depending on
which way,
what was the connection with his mother. Conchobar as the king had the right of the first night. Have you heard of this?
Oh yes, okay, yeah.
So that's something pretty dark.
It is.
Yeah, the right of the first night over all marriages. So apparently kings or lords or men in high positions, and this isn't just in Ireland or in Scotland, this is across Europe and possibly across the world, where on the wedding night, kings had the right to sleep with the woman on her wedding night. And so Conchobar would have had the right to do that with Emer. But again, perhaps I'm taking this very literally, again, just thinking that's his uncle or that's Cuchulain's grandfather. But apparently he was reluctant to use this right that he had because of the backlash from Cuchulain, and he was worried about Cuchulain's reaction.
Well, I mean, if you think of Cuchulain, must have been pretty well trained by that point as well.
Exactly.
Pretty fearsome.
Yeah, definitely. So perhaps that's just a side story that hopefully never happened.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, isn't it? It's as well that kind of thing of the male line continuing.
Yeah.
And I suppose if you were a king and you had those rights, then you could just decide where your line went, and you were going to have sons or daughters wherever, and you could,
It's pretty grim.
Pretty grim. And certainly I think a tradition that carried forward till, more recently than we'd like to think.
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah. Very unpleasant. So a few years later, Cuchulain's son by Aoife, who was called Conla, arrived in Ireland in search of Cuchulain. And Cuchulain didn't know who he was, thought he was an intruder, and started fighting with him. And because he hadn't identified himself, Conla hadn't identified himself as his son. And Cuchulain, the horrible irony in this is that he used the gay bulk, that barbed spear you were mentioning. Maybe we could talk about that in a minute. And kills his son. But as I don't know if I'm dramatising this more than it is, as he strikes his last blow or something, his son reveals who he is, and Cuchulain's grief-stricken. That's a really common story in other cultures as well, and other folklore across. I think there was a Persian story that had a very similar thing of the father not knowing the son and killing him in battle and all of this. So there's just a lot of sadness and brutality and very many twists along the way.
Yeah.
And so it seems surprising that I don't know. It seems surprising that he's such a celebrated character.
Yes, I think you're right, and I think again, coming back to trying to really to write the song, trying to really focus on Sgàthach, it started to get frustrating, coming every time, kind of looking into a different angle, but coming back to Cuchulain all the time, and the kind of the different things that had happened with Cuchulain, and he's said to have done his salmon leap, and that they enabled him to cross the bridge, and all these kind of little celebrated details about him, but not that focus on Sgàthach, who's the whole story, or the whole stories of Cuchulain and his son and Aoife and all these people just seem to revolve around her, rather than kind of touching on what impact did she have on them, what was her personality, what did she do. It was really interesting to read about all of it, but but I found it quite frustrating. It's like, yeah.
Right, let's turn our focus on Tasgadh now then. There was actually, side story. In about 1997, there was a Gaelic opera commissioned called Sgàthach. And it was, the words were written by Lindsay.
Yeah.
And the music was written by Alistair Nicholson, I think it was.
Okay.
And it was performed as part of Highland Year of Homecoming or one of the themed years in Highland.
Yeah.
And I was in first year of high school and I was part of this Gaelic opera. I loved it. It was so much fun. And my mum actually played the part of Sgàthach.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she was the warrior queen. And Anne Martin, if you know the Gaelic singer Anne Martin, she was Aoife in it.
Okay.
So they were duelling. And I remember my part, I was a young warrior in Aoife's camp. And I got killed in battle.
Oh, no.
But it was amazing. So that was the first time that I'd ever become aware of Sgàthach. I mean, I'm brought up in Skye and I'd never really heard the story of her. And then Skye is just 20 minutes down the road from me.
Yeah.
And I hadn't ever heard of her. But this opera was so impactful. I thought, wow. And then I kind of never heard anything of her again. So I was super pleased to see you'd done this song. And it brought back all these memories. I remember because we were warriors, we had these like braids, these rags braided into our hair. Brilliant. And the makeup we had was like a sunset across our eyes. Wow, it was amazing. And then we had to wear these kind of like furs and leathers. This sounds like raggedy.
Yeah.
And it was really vibrant. They had like jugglers and snakeboarders.
Wow.
And
I mean, I knew about it at the time, but I never saw it.
Right. Yeah. It's on videotape.
Oh, is it?
Yes.
Oh, amazing.
Which will hopefully get digitised at some point now. It'd be nice to see that again.
Yeah.
We performed it the next year in Eden Court Theatre in Inverness, which was lovely. I felt like at the age of 11 or 12, I just felt like my career peaked.
So you made it.
But anyway, that is a wonderful celebration. It was her name on the poster. It was all about her. Of course, Cúchaill and Aoife, Uachach, Cochar, Crúvid, they were all in it. Mm-hmm. But she was the centre of all of this. So let's carry on to the amazing work you've done and talk about Skye herself from a woman's perspective.
Yeah. I think kind of it was quite difficult to kind of get to the root of her. And I think by going to doing Skye and seeing her fortress and kind of what a position of power that was, right on the point, right with the sea surrounding it, you could see for miles. You could definitely see who was coming your way. You'd know what was happening. Yeah. And kind of for me, it was then about thinking about the natural elements and the wind and the sea that carried the people in but then would have taken them away, the wind that would have carried sounds, this kind of idea of her power really, and her power of vision. There were a lot of places that said that she had the gift of prophecy, that she possibly was the Celtic goddess of the dead and ensured passage of those killed in battle to Tír
oh wow! And Tír, for anyone who doesn't know, is like a Celtic afterlife.
That's right, the land of eternal youth, or definitely a Celtic afterlife. And she could communicate without speaking, so people would often arrive to be trained and they would hear her voice but not know where she was.
Oh wow.
And kind of have to, it wasn't just about physicality, it was about mental strength, mental battle, connection with the land, connection with nature, balance between peace and fighting. And and all of these things I found really interesting, and those were the kind of the linchpins, I guess, that really inspired the song. And then musically, when you listen to the song, there's kind of like a rippling motion, which is like that constant. When we went to the castle, the fortress, I took my kids, and it was really windy, but there was just that constant kind of sound of the sea on the rocks and the constant lovely sound of the wind, and that kind of really inspired, I think, the musical part of the song as well. But for me, it was really about giving Sgàthach her own voice, and without trying to force too many words, but just kind of, and we kind of came up with the Ismisha, I am this, I am that. And it was really important that it was from the first person perspective. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's very interesting. There's another line that I love just at the end of your verses, Clwyn Mughu, hear my voice.
Yeah.
And I just think, yes, that's so powerful. And it's almost like a very assured command.
Yeah. And I think she must have been really assured and really, really certain and strong, but also that, these songs that we're talking about are part of a wider project, which kind of is a collection of songs all based around women. But that did kind of tie in with that theme of like, hear my voice, because we don't hear enough women's voices. We don't hear enough from women's perspective. We don't hear enough about women's achievements, and often they're written away or they're attributed to men or something else. So it was really important for Sgàthach to have her voice heard, but also as a general kind of thing, hear my voice, hear women's voices, listen, go and find their stories, go and listen to them. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be about women telling women's stories. It should be everybody telling women's stories.
Absolutely.
I think that's really important.
That's an important point.
Yeah.
Yeah. It makes me think, of Mairi Kidd, the amazing writer.
Yes.
And she's done so much work, and she's written a couple of wonderful books, and one of them, Warriors, Witches and Damn Rebel Bitches, is amazing. And the first story in that book is about Skagh.
That's right.
But I can't remember if it's the introduction to that book or her other book, We're All Witches, but she has something like a fact that in Edinburgh there are more statues to animals than there are statues to women.
Absolutely.
Which is, if you think, and also at a time, I'm talking about the Ulster cycle being kind of first documented in medieval times, so many buildings. This is another thing Mairi picked up on in her book, like buildings were named after men. So to have this Dún Sgàth,
yes,
named and still named as
for her is an incredible, like, it's a win. It is a win. Mairi's books are brilliant, and they definitely, we while we were kind of starting the whole research into the project, I read most of her books because there were great little kind of loads of characters in there, amazing characters that you can dip in and out of, and we had a massive long list that we had to narrow down, but her writing's brilliant and so interesting, and a brilliant start point to kind of just starting to look in more depth at lots of these amazing women.
Yeah. Shall we take a look at the song then?
Yes.
Let's have a little look, and we'll look at the words first, and then maybe you would like to sing something.
Oh, okay. I can do that.
But it'd be nice if... So you said you wrote it in collaboration with Marcus McIntyre.
Yes.
Yeah. And you've written quite a lot with him.
Yeah, I started working with him on my last album, Girl, which was great. We went to the Poetry Library in Edinburgh and just kind of spent an afternoon. And I'd had an idea. I knew kind of roughly what I wanted the song to be. And we just sat and kind of went back and forwards. And we had a song by the end of the afternoon. I was like, oh, wow, that's great. Good work. Because I'm so slow. I take a long time. But I find lyric writing actually really painful and quite difficult.
Very difficult, yeah.
So that was great. And from there on, then we kind of went into lockdown and we went into all that kind of stuff. But we managed to keep going online. And I think the songs that we wrote, well, certainly Gormshùil and Sgàthach for this project were online. And we kind of zoomed each other backwards and forwards and had a kind of Word document open and just kind of figured it out that way, and they both kind of took shape that way, which was great. It works for us, and it's been really good.
Amazing. Right, let's take a look at it just now. Do you want to kind of read through it at all, and we can talk about what it's meaning?
Great. Okay, so Sgàthach starts with a statement, really, and it was that kind of in part of me was like, well, this is I am woman, hear me roar. Yeah. It was kind of that thing. So Mission Scáil an Scach Scó, Misha Chagarst Eragui, Misha Kidd and Gàidheal an Stúai, Misha Bre Be is Buai, Misha Banluch Skye is Ga, Mission Trianage Jenam Nan, Mission Fèisean Gungo, Misha Sgàthach Cluin Mohu. Translated, we went for, I am the shadow in the clouds, I am the whisper on the wind, I am the white crest of the waves, I am birth, life and victory. I am a she-warrior of shield and spear, that's that nasty little ga, that bird spear. I am the trinity of women, and we kind of talked about that earlier.
Trinity, yeah.
I am the prophet without deceit, I am Sgàthach, hear my voice.
It's so powerful.
Yeah, it like I said, it took us a while to get there, but I think that just kind of intent, that I am, this is me, I am this, and hear what I've got to say, was really important.
And it conjures up these images. You were talking about the situation of Tasgadh, her fortress, and you've got that wind and waves, very kind of elemental, is that
yes,
right?
Where, definitely.
Almost like she is Mother Nature.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think
that's cool.
In there.
Okay.
Then we went to, it was kind of split into 3 sections. So the next kind of section, Iar arstan dún for Ska a chulin gui. Hued mi ashling do rein, do hech en gar a coin. Fiech de chria, fiech de chal, fiech en bjarn etter be is baas. O a leuch, lain is smuish, is miolas as prish le duish. So really it was just kind of about pinning her down to a location, so where that people were coming to find her, that she was important, that people were coming to look for her, not that she didn't have to leave her fortress. Everybody came to her,
like a magnet.
Yes,
but her reputation is just so strong and powerful.
Yes, yeah, that everybody came to her. In the shadow of the Black Coolin, and it's just such a striking location.
Oh yeah.
I had a dream of you coming, so this kind of speaks to her second sight, her ability to see things that were going to happen, your approach on the roar of the ocean. And I guess this kind of does pay some reference to Cuchulainn, who was it the famous warrior who came to her. So although he's not mentioned by name, purposefully, there is kind of that she knew he was coming. She kind of understood that this was something that would come to her. And then try your heart, try your fate, attempt the bridge between life and death. And this is while there is an actual physical bridge, there's also that symbolic bridge of making that leap. They had to find their way to cross the bridge and make that leap between kind of life and death, and perhaps rebirth, a new life, being trained by her. Hero of blade and marrow, so really just that kind of physical male hero. That her knowledge, my knowledge, is the most precious prize. That's what you've come for. That's what you've come to find.
That's amazing to have that absolute conviction in yourself as well. It's... Yeah. I keep saying it's powerful. It is.
Yeah.
And perhaps as well, you mentioned that there's no reference to what she looked like or anything. That's almost a win in itself, just to kind of go, that's none of that matters.
Exactly.
None of the superficial, none of the fobbing women off with kind of pretty compliments.
Yeah.
None of it's there, because she was such a force and wise and pretty impressive woman.
So then the last wee section then. Fiach corm ha dáin san tír, hic bio le tuag do lia, huad mi ashling do rain, chula mi do heach an gar a chuain. Fag do rí is fai do glór, fiach is glé an úl an áir. O a luch, láin is smúis, is miolas as prís le dúis. So again, this is kind of then thinking about the balance. So behold the balance between deep in the land, come to life with your choice of path. So it's that kind of choosing whether you're going to go for violence or whether you're going to have balance or whether you're going to have peace. So kind of thinking about those things. I dreamed of your coming, heard your approach on the ocean's roar. So that's kind of a repetition of the first section. Leave your anger, find your glory, try to grasp the golden apple. And again, that golden apple does appear in the stories where they take a bite of the golden apple, and it gives them knowledge or a feminine perspective. And it's that the golden apple becomes a symbol of feminine knowledge and feminine balance.
Oh, wow.
And it was something that we talk about reaching for the highest apple, but this golden apple in this case was more of like a female symbolism thing. Nice. And then hero of blade and marrow, my knowledge is the most precious prize. And then it kind of finishes by going back to that first section where she's saying I am.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of song, there's not loads and loads of lyrics in there. There's not like a whole load of stuff, but I think by saying less, in a way, sometimes you say more, because you have to kind of really focus on what is being said.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of packed with thoughts, a lot of thought behind it. Yeah, but I find that really interesting. Especially, I think the part that jumps to me is the tríonage and the trinity of women. That's thrown me. I didn't expect that at all. I'm like, oh, it's such it's a lovely perspective.
Yeah,
to have.
Yeah,
not a mention of him.
No.
Sorry, I keep mentioning
women power.
It's brilliant. And in doing it, like, was there any sort of in composing this story? Was there any? I don't know. Did it have any impact on yourself personally, or like?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the whole project, from a personal perspective, was quite. It was really interesting, but it was quite challenging. I think some of the subjects that were dealt with, there was one in particular about domestic abuse and abuse of women that was really difficult to do the research on. It's just like, my goodness, and you find yourself kind of getting quite angry about stuff. But for this, again, a lot of the time, it's just the frustration of, why is there not a female perspective on this? Why are we overlooking these women, or the power of these women, what these women achieved, what their symbolism was, what they symbolised? So yeah, and it certainly made me kind of look at the way I read stuff now, or the way I look at stuff now is like, well, is this from a male perspective? What kind of, how am I looking at this? With whose eyes am I looking at this story? Yeah. And it makes me kind of just think about, I'm always saying, where are the women anyway? And I realise that can come across as really quite harshly feminist, or or unquestioning, but it's not, because I think there's just now, I think we have a role to kind of say, well, yeah, where are the women? Where is the women's perspective? We are 50% of the population. And there's still not enough that's written about us for us. And I think, that there's obviously a long way to go in changing that, but it's just kind of getting people to look a little deeper sometimes. And it's certainly been a really enjoyable process for me.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you for it.
Oh.
So it's not only a beautiful song, but yeah, to explore some of the thought process behind it and the creativity and adjusting your perspective is, yeah, we should all be looking a bit closer and thinking a bit harder.
I think it's just questioning things. It's just having a basic question of going, okay, that's fine, I get it. This is brilliant. I really love this story, or I'm really enjoying this, but where's my perspective from, and what could be different?
How do you think that we balance then the fact that the Cúchulainn story, I mean, it's fun, it's an enjoyable story.
Absolutely.
Like, how do you balance that then when you kind of dig and go, well, what is the reality here? And in our 21st century kind of where we can more freely speak and shout for women, like, how appropriate is it to herald Cúchulainn a hero?
I mean, I think it's, you can read the story and get a lot of enjoyment out of it, and there's still loads of stuff in there that's really interesting and speaks a lot of our folklore and a lot of our history and a lot of really interesting things in there. Absolutely. I'm not saying don't take enjoyment out of stuff. There is, but it's also kind of just stopping for a second and saying, this is a great story. What are the other things in there that I might be missing, or who's written this, or when's it been written, how's it been written, who's it been written for, and then kind of there might be other things to be found out as well.
That's lovely. Would you mind singing?
No,
I
can sing a little bit.
Okay.
I'll sing you the wee section, then the kind of I Am Woman section. I'll have a go at that. Okay, so. Mission Sgàthach Sgàthach Sco, Misha Chagar Stedagay, Misha Kidd and Gàidheal Thuai, Misha Brebes Boy, Misha Banlach Sgàthach, Mission Trianage Jenamnan, Mission Fèisean and Go, Misha Sgàthach Klein Mogu.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Thank you.
So let's move on to our next song.
Okay.
Again, a wonderful story behind it. So many stories, in fact, and so many offshoots arising from this.
Yes.
And we're going to be talking about Gormshùil.
Yes. So Gormshùil Vor na Maya, to give her a full title, was a kind of a given for me because she's got such local history to me. So, and I think she does for you as well.
Oh, she does.
Yeah.
I found out she was from Skye originally. And McKinnon's are probably South Skye as well.
Yes. But there's lots of kind of legend around where I am. So in Gairlochie, Moy is about 2 miles away from Gairlochie, and that's where she was being based. And if you see a hare on the road, you have to be very careful because it is Gormshùil. And if you run her over, you will have bad luck forever. So people around where I am are really, really wary of hares. And you literally, there are no rabbits, there are only hares. But yeah, you have to be really careful of them.
Amazing.
And then there are lots of kind of little places kind of named for her. So there's the Witch's Cauldron, which is pretty close to where I am in Achnacarry. She's buried in the graveyard in Moy. And reportedly the path of the Caledonian Canal was changed because they would not dig through her graveyard.
Oh, wow.
So that kind of the
That's
engineers,
amazing.
the engineers absolutely would not go near that graveyard. So the Caledonian Canal has a wee dogleg in it to avoid Gormshùil. But yeah,
that's really good to hear.
Yes.
That reminds me, sorry, I'm off on a tangent already, Rachel. It reminds me of over in Ireland, there's a motorway was being built, and there was a tree, a very important tree in kind of fairy culture that they absolutely would not take down, and so it goes around it.
Yeah.
It's a very sparse story there.
Yeah, but no, it's the same kind of thing, which, it's really interesting. And of course, Gormshùil also brings up the whole question of witches and how why we label people witches and where that label came from. I know there's kind of been a lot of discussion around that recently with Heal and Harrow project and other things, which is really interesting, and it's definitely a question. Coming back again to that whole woman's perspective, it's a question that we should be asking now. I think about who was a witch, probably a healer, probably somebody that was quite outspoken or knowledgeable, connection to nature, all of these kind of gifts that perhaps women were used to having, but as Christianity moved in, they became no longer
So we're
acceptable.
actually seeing quite a lot of parallels with Sgàthach here.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Kind of their skills kind of deployed in different ways, but again, at the root of it all, knowledge, nature, and the church, perhaps.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So again, I'm going to tell a bit of the stories, the kind of folklore that surrounds Gormshùil, and then we can take a look at kind of trying to unpick some of that and having a more human perspective on her.
Yes.
So Gormshùil was possibly the most... I feel she was highly regarded.
I think she was. She seems to have been kind of acknowledged as one of the most powerful witch, if we're going to use that term, in the Highlands. Yeah,
let's make a disclaimer. We will use the term witch, however, in a folklore story sense rather than in any kind of negative, harrowing way that transpired around about that time period, actually. She was the most powerful witch in the West Highlands, and she wasn't the only one. There were many kind of famous ones.
There were, and they kind of played into the song, and I think we'll probably touch on the story of how that happened in a little while.
Definitely. So there are many stories surrounding Gormshùil, and I think the song mentions something about the coins, the Matthean,
Yes.
Is that can you tell us actually that story?
I can. So part of the research for this song, I went on to a place called Callum MacLean's blog spot.
Yes, I had a look at that as well.
And he was... Where are we? Here we go. That's not the one.
Callum MacLean, who was the great... the brother of Sorrel MacLean.
Ah, okay.
I think, if it's the same that. Callum MacLean.
Quite possibly.
And a collector of stories, and did a lot for the School of Scottish Studies.
Yes.
The same one.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
So he had... he has a blog spot about Gormshùil Mhór na Maya, and two stories in particular on his blog spot really kind of helped to inspire this song. And we've kind of mentioned that she was a wise woman, but she was quite heavily involved with the Carons of Lochiel, who are the clan chiefs for this area, for Lochaber. And he often called on her for advice. So Dol Cameron of Lochiel would often kind of call on Gormshùil as an advisor. And there's this brilliant story that she met Lochiel one day and asked him where he was going. And he said, well, I'm going to meet the Duke of Atholl in order to put the borders right between Lochaber and Perthshire. So quite an important land matter. And she said, well, are you going on your own? And he said, yes, I am going on my own. And she said, don't be, basically said, don't be stupid. Go back and take your men with you. So he went back and he took 25 men with him. And they hid in the bushes so that he would look, to all intents and purposes, like he came on his own. So he met with the Duke of Atholl, and the Duke of Atholl said, and Lochiel said, right, well, this is where the border is going to be. And of course, the Duke of Atholl completely disagreed with that. Said, absolutely not. You have to go back. And Lochiel's like, well, I'm not going back. And there's this back and forwards between the two of them. So the Athol lifted his hands, and his men came out of the kind of bushes and undergrowth, and Lochiel said, "Well, what's that?" And the Duke said, "Well, this is the Athol Weathers coming to graze the Lochaber grass." And so Lochiel took his coat off and turned it inside out, and that signalled to his men to come out of the grass. And the Duke of Athol said, "Well, what's this?" And the Lochiel said, "Well, this is the Lochaber dogs coming to eat the flesh of the Athol Weathers." So, advised by Gormshùil, he saved his borders. But it's a great line, and that kind of finds its way into the song in terms of the Sgàthach, the turning of the coat, and the loyal Lochaber dogs coming to eat the sheep.
Yeah. So, and you see there someone working with a witch as well.
And I think, it's the thing about the Highland witches is that they were quite revered, actually, and celebrated for a lot longer than witches in other parts of Scotland were. I think a lot of them were being persecuted before the Highland witches really kind of felt the brunt of that. A lot of clan chiefs, MacLeod of Mull had an Deirdre Graham, who he consulted on, and Deirdre Graham then called on Gormshùil to help her cause, and they were well respected in terms of the advice that they could give or the powers that they had to help a clan or a clan chief.
Yeah. So perhaps the most well-known story that involves Gormshùil. It's a fantastic story. It involves, in fact, it centres more closely on Deirdre Graham, the Mull witch, and it's about the sinking of the Spanish Armada in 1588. So I was reading different accounts of this, and I'm actually going to read a passage from a book called The Gaelic Otherworld. Do you know that book?
No.
Oh, it's so good. I tell everyone about it. It's about that thing. Okay. Which no one will know what I'm saying. It's a really, really thick book called The Gaelic Otherworld, and it kind of it was compiled by John Gregerson Campbell. The Gaelic Otherworld by John Gregerson Campbell, who, interestingly, as a wee side note, was a Free Church minister. So
wow.
I find that very interesting, the whole otherworld and religion.
Yeah.
That'll be the next podcast. But here's a passage from the Gaelic Otherworld. It's quite long, but this is a backstory, and then we'll finally get there. Just relax. So it says, by far the most celebrated tale of this class is that of the destruction of Captain Forrest's ship by witches in the Sound of Mull. Viola, daughter of the King of Spain, dreamt of a remarkably handsome man and made vow not to rest till she found him. She fitted out a boat and in the course of her wanderings came to Tobermory Bay. Here she saw MacLean of, now it says Dowart, is it Dewart? Dewart, okay, who proved to be the man she was in search of, and though he was a married man, became too intimate with him. MacLean's wife, in her jealousy, caused her servant Smollett, a South Countryman, to blow up the ship with all on board. After setting fire to a fuse leading up to the magazine, Smollett made his escape, and by the time the explosion took place, reached Pennygown, a distance 10 or 12 miles away. The cook was blown to Strong Garave, rough nose, near Tobermory, where there is a cleft still bearing the name of Uav Chochgade, the cook's cave. The princess herself fell somewhere in the Sound and was buried at Kiel, the Lochalling burying ground in Morven. So that's the first section.
Yeah.
Upon hearing the news of the dreadful event reaching Spain, Captain Forrest was sent with a ship to take vengeance against the Mull people by taking the right breast of every Mull woman. You've heard this one?
Yes.
When the ship came, the Lady of Dewart sent for Deirdre, the Mull witch, and by her means, with assistance procured by neighbouring witches, Captain Forrest's ship was sunk before next morning. Deirdre shut herself up in a house alone at Gurman Point near Dewart, and there made her incantations. A rope was put through a hole in a rafter, and all night long the hand mill, or bra, was hoisted up the beam, lowered and hoisted again. A native of Tiree reported that having come that evening to Sgàthach's house, he was compelled by her to hoist and lower the millstone all night without rest or refreshment, while the witch herself went away to Tiree and elsewhere for help. On her return, she said that when in Tiree, she had been detained a little in extinguishing a fire which had been caused by a spark falling amongst the fodder in the stirk house, belonging to the man who was her unwilling assistant.
Oh, gosh.
Poor guy, what did he get himself into? And then his house gets set on fire. As the quern was raised, a gale sprang up and increased in fury as the operation went on. At the same time, gulls, and others say hooded crows, others say black cats. So again, this idea of animals and transforming, transfiguration comes in a lot. Yes. Gulls appeared on the yard arms of the devoted ship. Captain Forrest knew the black art himself and went below. As word was brought to him that another gull had appeared on the rigging, he said, "Phone me heen ye shall hast, I will suffice for this yet." He could keep the sheep against, some say 8, others 9 witches. But ere all the play was played, there were 16, some say 18 on the yards. Their names depend on the fancy of the narrator, and the Mull witches, na Dutchgan Mullach, were there, and the most powerful of the sisterhood from the surrounding districts. All accounts agree that when Gormshùil Vód Maya came, the ship sank.
Yeah.
In the morning, Sgàthach was told her house had been unroofed in the gale, but she was comforted in being told the dreaded ship had gone down opposite Corran Bay. Maha Usakandai ha Captain Forrest gone long. If you're without a house, Captain Forrest is without a ship.
Brilliant.
It's good, isn't it? So, although that centres around in Sgàthach Bullach, you've got Gormshùil Vód coming in, and it's so interesting that all the accounts, I mean, that's just the one in the Gaelic Otherworld, but there are so many documents of the story, and she appears in all of them.
Yes.
It's like her presence or powers or whatever it might be was the kind of deciding factor.
Absolutely. And you know that kind of plays into, again, kind of different versions that I looked at where, you know, these other witches had gathered, and then the sailors were on the boat, kind of things were terrible were happening, and then they saw this black crow, this black raven with the feathers, and they were like, that is Gormshùil, we're done for, you know, so that they recognised that she was there, and that was them finished. You know, and all sorts of things that she brought cats with her. There were sparks that ignited the masts, and loads of different kind of things among it. But it's just so interesting to kind of have that connection with animals and nature, but also that kind of connection to her, that power to her. And I think the thing that really struck out for me in terms of the song was that idea of women coming together that could make a storm that was so powerful that they could change the weather and they could conjure up this storm. Well,
there is another story and another song that does exist that links in really nicely here. I'm sure you'll know it as well. And that is, I've actually spoken about this before, but it's the drowning of Ian Gareth in 1671. And if I may read,
please do,
another section, and this, I took this section. I mean, like, I don't think I could be accused for plagiarism if I just admit I'm totally reading from it, from Anne Lauren Gillis's book, and she learned Songs of Gaelic Scotland. She learned it from John MacLean. So, and it's linked to the Mull story, because off the back of the Mull story, the witches were once again requested. They were requested to come and deal with another situation with Ian Gareth. So here's a little bit from Anne Lauren Gillis's book, and I'll mix a couple of versions in. It says, "It seems that Ian Gareth had been on his way with a fleet of barges to conquer the Isle of Lewis.
Woofed.
When he called in to see the clan chief Donald at Duntullum Castle, which is up in the north of Skye. As the two great men were sharing a hospitable dram together, their dogs began fighting under the table, and the MacLeod's dog won. Now, Ian Gareth was Ian Gareth MacGilliachalum Rarser, and he was the son to the clan chief of Razzie, of MacLeod's of Razzie. Yeah. So he was the MacLeod man. The MacLeod's dog won. MacDonald was so furious that he bribed Ian Gareth's nurse to drown him.
Oh my goodness.
How to resolve matters in the 17th century. Which is a bit of an overreaction. But Ian Gareth's nurse to drown him. She in turn enlisted the help of Sgàthach and other witches. As the... Oh, it says hags. I don't like that word.
I don't like that word.
I don't. Alighted en masse on Ian Gareth's gunwales. The warrior drew his sword and aimed a mighty stroke at one of them, but his weapon missed the mark and split the whole galley from keel to gunwale. All on board were drowned. Afterwards, it is said the nurse was so contrite at her part in the matter that she composed Cua Ian Gareth.
Okay.
Now, there's a wee bit more, and again, the Gaelic Otherworld has a slightly different take on it. The witch was Ian Gareth's foster mother, who resided on the islet of Trothay on the east of Skye. She overheard a friend of hers say he wished Ian Gareth, who was known to have gone to Lewis, was drowned, and took up seriously words spoken only in jest. Others say she was bribed by an enemy to effect the hero's destruction. He left Loch Shallock in Lewis to proceed home on a calm day. The witch was a banachig, or dairymaid, in Trotha, and seeing the boats coming, put milk in a large dish, and could see both the milk pan and Ian Gareth's boat. She herself stood with her foot in the sway or chimney crook and began her holy incantations. Soon the dish in the milk pail began to be violently agitated. The boy reported it first as going round sunwise, Gàidheal, and then going against the sun, striking the sides of the basin, and finally as being capsized and floating bottom upwards, Ep4 Foipe. The storm had been all this time increasing till at last it blew a perfect hurricane. That night, the heap of shingle on the east side, in Taoiseach, called Mulstavan, was washed ashore. Ian Gareth's boat disappeared simultaneously with the capsizing of the bow, and all on board perished. And just one more bit, if I may, from Alexander Carmichael, who wrote Carmina Gaelica, books of incantations and stuff, says, when the galley was between Sgàthach and Trondai Ichuain, 3 ravens were seen hovering about the boat in a raging storm. So this, I think, is the version I've heard most often, with the ravens and touching again on what you were saying. Yeah. Soon afterwards, 20 birds flew into the boat and assumed the form of frogs.
Wow.
All the witches of Scotland were there, and all as busy as could be, but they could not sink the galley until Ian Gareth said, "What big brindled one, i.e. the devil, have you brought here?" Then Ian Gareth became distracted from the number of ravens flying about and the number of frogs leaping aloft. Then a huge raven lighted on the gunwale beside him, and he drew his sword from his sheath to kill it, and in his fury he drove the sword down through the gunwale and clove the boat right to the keel. So it's really interesting, that idea of animals again.
Yeah, it is.
Frogs, some say cats, some say... Yeah, all of them coming in. Anyway, so they're the stories that I know that kind of link boats and storms and animals and everyone. And at the centre of this, I know these stories kind of centred around Sgàthach, but Gormshùil makes an appearance in them. So let's return to her now.
Okay.
And what did you come up with, Rachel?
I think so the song from my perspective, does focus on Gormshùil and her kind of role as an advisor and her role as a kind of a powerful, strong woman. But I also kind of wanted to kind of play on that idea that women have had these gifts of healing and wisdom and intuition and all of these things that pre-Christianity perhaps were much more celebrated, and that these things were the things that made her powerful. You know, not necessarily that she was particularly magic, or and maybe she was, you know, maybe there was that element of that. I'm not letting go of that for many purposes, but I think I said that I spoke to a healer when I was studying Sgàthach. So I also did when I was looking at this song, because it seemed really appropriate when kind of looking at feminine powers and things that maybe we've lost somewhere along the way.
Yeah.
And it, you know, those things came up, that intuition, the knowledge, the listening and understanding and empathy and all of these things that we have. I mean, I'm not saying men don't have them. Absolutely they do. But women, you know, we're mothers, you know, we bring children into the world. There's something slightly different going on there. And so that idea, but then she spoke really strongly about this ability of women, that the power of women working together, that could change the weather, that could shift, you know, make a storm. And that really kind of, that was kind of a linchpin for me that really got to me. And I think so then that whole song just became about this, you know, the gathering not only of women, not only of women together, but of a storm, of something brewing, this kind of swirling thing, you know, the dancing, the singing, the incantations, but more than all of that, just the power of women working together, because that can be an amazing thing. Definitely. You know, now it's an amazing thing. It's great. So I kind of really wanted to celebrate that, I think, in this song. And so, you know, you were talking about Sgàthach going to find the help from Tiree. So I think it was Lurach from Tiree was the witch from there, and then there was Glashric from Isla, and then there was Benelacking from where was she from? From Badenoch. You know, there were a few of them. There was Mulower from Kintyre. There was Corach from Glencoe.
Oh wow! And Spoltvia, one of them. Have you heard that one?
Oh no, I haven't heard of her. Oh. But you know, there were a lot, and they were celebrated. And when they came together, it must have been a real, you know, it must have been a big thing. You know, it must have been really exciting to see what were they going to do, what would they come up with. And they obviously did have a circle of friendship. You know, I kind of came on this idea of a circle as well, in terms of all the symbolism around a circle of life, circle of friendship, circle of, you know, perpetual motion, the storm, the circulating storm, all of these things. So yeah, I think that really kind of played a big role in this song. All of those kind of animal, nature, plants references, and then the coming together, just that gathering of people to create or do something.
It's a really powerful, so I keep using the word powerful. I love this track on the album. It's your arrangement as well, your string parts. You've got to give a shout out to that.
Definitely. So the strings for this were done by Shona Aitken, and it was a bit sneaky on my behalf, because we were meant to just send her one arrangement to do, and it wasn't for Gormshùil, and I snuck this in, and we knew she was really busy. And
sorry, Shona.
Yeah, no, but she was like, "Oh, okay, I'll do it." So we had the strings in the studio for a day. We'd finished all the rest of the recording, and we had them up in Appin in St Mary's Space, and Aaron, who I worked with on the project, couldn't be there, so he was sitting on a computer on Zoom, just kind of watching everything that was going on. And so we'd kind of got through all the other tracks and we were finished recording. The girls kind of had to leave because they had to travel back, and we were messaging backwards and forwards to Shona, and she's like, I'm in a taxi in Amsterdam and I'm just finishing it. I'm nearly done. I was like, oh my God. Just think, what's going to go? What's this going to be?
Oh,
and
my
then,
goodness.
And then it arrived. All the parts came through and kind of sat, and then the next thing ran the track, and they just played it. You know, they played it first off. They didn't have a run through. They didn't have any practice. They just played the track, and it was just. I mean, I think musically, in terms of musical experiences in my life, that'll stand out as one of the most amazing things.
I mean, like those players as well are amazing. It's so impactful. It's like when you're in the studio and you've got that string quartet.
Yeah.
So I know Shona didn't play on it, but Shona writing the part, she had Patsy Reid, Alice Allen, Katrina Lee,
and Rosalind Lawton.
Okay. I mean, what a force.
I mean, it was amazing. I mean, it'd already been an amazing day, and then Shona had been kind of really clever about. I think it's one of the big skills that Shona has, is that she knows when she's writing who she's writing for, and she can really play to their skills. And so she had left sections. One in particular for Alice to solo on the cello, and one in particular for Patsy to solo on the violin, fiddle. And I mean, I just remember sitting there. You know, it was kind of and we'd kind of said the idea of a storm, and it just totally did that. It totally did what she just got it. Yeah. And so, you know, then Alice she's so expressive on the cello, all the kind of sounds that were coming out, and then. Yeah, it was brilliant. I can't really vocalise properly what it was like to kind of see that come together, but it was just like, oh my gosh, she just totally understood exactly what we wanted from the track and totally nailed it. So
she does. She's unbelievable, and they're unbelievable players, and it's undeniably Patsy and Alice, and when you hear the recording, so when you listen to it, and without knowing that information, if you go and listen to the track on the album. It does. It's like a frenzied storm whipping up, and it just conjures up all these images of those folkloric tales that we've just been speaking of, and it's very fitting.
And I think, you know, it was extra special to have an all-female quartet.
Yep.
Arranged by a woman, you know, a song written about a powerful woman or powerful women coming together, and I think
written by a woman yourself.
Yeah, but I think that came through in the studio. I think kind of there was this, along with the music, there was this feeling of togetherness, and you know, you can hear it at the end, the finish. It's just like yes, yes.
Can I think from ear to ear, just delighted.
Yeah,
it's marvellous. It's. Dare I say, am I allowed to say it's my favourite track on the album? Shall we have a look at the song then? Let's have a look at the words and have a wee sing.
Okay. So again, this was composed with Marcus, Mark and Torna. We worked together on this, and again, it was kind of, you know, having done the research and having kind of looked at the stories that were really going to inspire that, then kind of drilling down on vocabulary and the kind of words that we wanted to use and how we wanted to go about it. So again, this kind of it's got loads of verses. I don't know how many you want, but it comes in kind of sections. There's three kind of sections which start to build the storm up, if you like. So the first bit, Crunnichiv, and we kind of used that idea all the way through, with that kind of idea of gathering, you know, in so many different ways, gathering in lots of different ways. Caran an banal, gleichgus is lershin, stoi me soundtach, fo jaloch voren, a hirken an arste, mir in a vash, runniken sreilton. And this was kind of about, you know, just kind of women's gifts, I guess, in a way. So gather, gather, womanly wiles, temperance, wisdom and perception, temperance and courage, under a woman's moon, which, if you look, there are different moons. It depends which way it's sitting.
Okay.
So a woman's moon has the points facing upwards. And then there's a men's moon which has the points facing downwards. So there's different types of moons. So a woman's moon is where the horns or the points face upwards, and so they're horns ascendant. Foxgloves, fingers of death. Mir and Avash is the Gaelic for foxgloves, which is because it's digitalis, obviously. And Rinnekin's Railton, stars. So it's just kind of, again, tapping into nature and the things that are there. And then we kind of played into the story that we talked about earlier about Gàidheal. Hica Vizirav, Cohorla and Yolich, Ria Gàidheal, Toish de Chinevin, Brian Aprach and Chachkich Gachundach, Smatty and Geelis, a Yichich na Curich. So come and ask for the advice of the knowing woman. So that's kind of her saying, come and ask. Gàidheal, chieftain, measure your destiny. On Lachaber Braes, the jacket turned. It is loyal dogs that would eat the sheep.
Oh, yes. Got that bit in there.
So and then the witches start to gather. So Crynnichiv, Ferichin Crínach, Glashrig Eloch, Lurach and Chiristich, and Dotchag Vulach, Sheol Chlawn Ehen, Hik Benalachin Lya, Kerkel a Charstis. So again, playing on the idea of a circle, but gather, sisters in wisdom, Glashrig from Isla, Lurach of Tyree, the Dotchak from Mull, the soothsayer of the Clan MacLean, or the kind of prophet, or Ben Alakin will come, a circle of friendship. So it was that idea that there was, it was friendship. There was this friendship between them that I really liked. And then Shenyamich, Downsamich, and Coherem Lechela, Sprekig, Sturm, Lupacan, Sopacan, Gach Giftis Kuach, Cho Sheench is Ray Aun, Gnieven, Nyarsht, Javoranoch, Kola. So we'll dance, we'll sing in harmony together, inciting a storm with charms and incitements.
So Lupacan's Upcan.
Yes.
That's a brilliant line. Lupacan's Upcan.
Yeah, it's great. I think that's the great thing about working with Marcus is that he has quite an interesting. We use Dwelly when we're doing it. We kind of go into the dictionaries and kind of look at how different kind of things have been used, and he just has such a really kind of artistic, poetic grasp on how to kind of use different bits of vocabulary, and it makes it musical, I think.
Yes,
which
music
is really
very
nice.
onomatopoeic, but it also conjures up, just really helps that image in your head. It's
totally.
Brilliant. That's a cracker.
Totally. Each gift and power aligned and in parallel, the acts of strength, women together.
Great.
And then we kind of get into this last section, which is the storm really gathering. So Crynnichiv, Gurhan na Hian Mulch, Du shall Sgàthach, Lupach Alias Gain, Gach crown for Alice, and shawl for Vueris, Roch and Scancha, Chicken Knavich. So gather, winds of the heavens or the firmament, scudding clouds, and it sounds like it. Du shall Sgàthach. It sounds like the bending to our will. So that's that kind of being in control of the clouds. Each mast under shadow, sails tormented, ropes split, raven's feathers, and that's that idea of her kind of coming in with her as a raven.
Yep.
And then the last bit, Hica Vistúrachiv, Favrich na Hjúnrish, Kochbich Vana, Spanich fo Huach Tain, na Messiv Isel, Erelus Meempish, Beminig va Buagvor, Gormshùil Voro. So come and harness the swirling tempest, the foam of the waves, Spanish kind of sucked under the waves, if you like. Don't underestimate my foresight and intuition, often was victorious, great Gormshùil.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. You've got such a mix there of the kind of the story elements, but the nature as well, and the women at the centre.
Yes.
It really ties it all together really well. What I like about this song as well is that you've got your vocables at the end of each line, your hi-yo, hi-yoro,
Yes,
such a common theme and particularly in women's songs. You see it in walking songs, and just that element of people joining in. It's such an easy way for people to sing with you when you have these vocables.
I think that was the idea. I think it was one of the first kind of thoughts I did have about the song was that I wanted it to kind of have a walking song element. And there's another reason for that, actually, because on Callum MacLean's blogspot there is a walking song, which apparently has been ascribed to two witches, one of whom was Gormshùil, as they call her, but Gormshùil, and the other witch from Glengarry. And apparently they really hated each other. And she was so angry, the Glengarry witch was so angry at the end of this that she burst into flames.
Wow.
But it's, Hugh, Hurdy, Harrow. So some of this that kind of just inspired it a little bit, and I thought how nice to kind of bring a walking song idea into this because there's something already there. So yeah, I don't know the tune or the melody of this at all.
It'd be nice to either uncover it if there was anyone who knew that, or to
set it.
Yeah. That's cool.
So yeah, I like that story about the getting so angry that you burst into flames. I can identify with that.
Yeah. Have a moment. Shall we give this a wee song? I'll maybe join in with the
excellent.
The vocables.
Great. Okay, let's have a wee go at it. It's one it's one of these ones that you kind of get so carried away with the writing process and it's all great, and then actually it's really difficult to sing it.
There's no gaps. It's quite relentless, isn't it?
No. So let's have a wee go. See how we get on. Crennichef, hi-yo, Karen and Banal, hi-yo, Stoi me soundtoch, hi-yo, Glichges is leischen, hi-yo, For Jalach foren, hi-yo, Atgen an Arsje, hi-yo, Mir in a Vash, hi-yo, Runnekens Reelten, hi-yo, Hikke we sier of hi-yo, Carlin Jolich, hi-yo, Ria Lochiel, hi-yo, Toish doch in jeven, hi-yo, Brian Aproch, hi-yo, En Shachkich Gatjundig, hi-yo, Smatty and Giles, hi-yo, Eichich ne Curry, hi-yo, Crennichef, hi-yo, Ferich en Krienoch, hi-yo, Glashrikilach, hi-yo, Lyric en Chiristich, hi-yo, En Dotjak Vulach, hi-yo, Shelchonehen, hi-yo, Ik ben a lakkinge, hi-yo, Kechkelach Arstjes, hi-yo, Shenje mit Downse mit hi-yo, Koherem lechela, hi-yo, Sprekig starem, hi-yo, Lupeken sopeken, hi-yo, Gach giftes kuach, hi-yo, Koshintjes reon, hi-yo, Nieven jaarstje, hi-yo, Worden noch kola, hi-yo, Crennichef, hi-yo, Gönne hier mot hi-yo, Du shall Sgàthach, hi-yo, Lupa ger aldis gein, hi-yo, Gach kraun for alles, hi-yo, En sjå for vores, hi-yo, Roppen skantje, hi-yo, Ichtjeken kravich, hi-yo, Hikke vi stjurich hi-yo, Fabrik ne hjunrich, hi-yo, Kochbich vana, hi-yo, Spanjich for huagtainja, hi-yo, Ne messe wiesel, hi-yo, Alles min pish, hi-yo, Beminnig va burg for, hi-yo, Godem hul vodo, hi-yo, yeah.
It stands alone, though, we were talking about the string arrangements and everything, but it does just stand by itself as a really solid Great song.
It's really nice. I've never actually sung it unaccompanied on its own before, or had somebody sing along with the kind of vocal. So it's really nice to do it a different way.
Singing along in the car driving here.
Brilliant. Yeah, good.
Yeah, and that's another kind of sign of a great song though as well, that it can have all the dressing and all the amazing kind of creativity and magic of instrumentation, but it's just as a standalone song, it's just it's cracking.
Yeah, I kind of hope it does, and I kind of hope the songs that are on the kind of as part of the whole project does. It was really important to both Aaron and I that they did work. The whole idea was that it was just going to be a duo album. There's not going to be anything else on it at all. So it was just going to be.
Well, that went out the window.
Yeah, it was meant to be quite simple. And then we did a gig as part of the Lochshiel Festival where we had a string quartet, and we were like, oh no, we're going to have to write strings into this. So we did, but I think we've just been on tour with it as a duo, and it seemed to work okay. So I'm hoping that they stand on their own.
Yeah. Well, I've already made a decision. I might teach it at a Fèisean.
Excellent.
Later this year, and give that to the kids, because it's brilliant. It's such a great song. It's got a great story, both folklore and also kind of really strong kind of woman's perspective behind it as well, which is brilliant. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, I've loved that. It's been so nice to talk to you. And it's a really nice thing actually with new songs. Like I say, it's the first time I've done this with new songs. So actually, there's no kind of supposition around it. It's just like, what is that?
Yes,
what was the? You know, it's really nice to actually be able to ask you what's the meaning behind it.
Yeah, and I think it's nice to be able to talk about it as well, because there's only so much you could put in a CD sleeve note or somewhere, and there's when you're doing a gig you can tell stories to an extent, but people want to hear music. They don't necessarily want to hear you talking all the time. So it's a really nice opportunity to kind of talk about what made the process happen. And for me it was just such a treat to work with Marcus and work with Aaron on both of these, and the project as a whole, as I said. So more of that, I think. Well,
you say more of that. You said you had a big, long list of... I'm about to put you on the spot. Like, is that something, whether it forms an album or not, is that something you are looking to do, to kind of continue with those voices of...
I think there's definitely room for it. We've talked about the long list a couple of times before, and there are so many kind of stories and achievements and just women in general that are worthy of a song. So I think that's something definitely kind of somewhere along the line. I think we'd quite like to look at writing something away from a brief for a little while and then kind of come back to it. But I definitely wouldn't rule that out. I think that's possibly a thing.
Right, we'll hold you to it. Oh, that's lovely. And what a lovely project to have conjured up.
Ah, what a great choice of words.
I know. I just realised I can't not say it.
That's brilliant. Yeah, no, thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure. Yeah.
Well, and thank you for speaking to me today.
You're welcome.
I've really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it too. Thank you.
Total pleasure. Thanks once more to Rachel for sharing her work, her practice and her insight into the worlds of these two great women in history. You can find out more about her project Despite the Wind and Rain, as well as buying or streaming the album via her website www.rachelwalkerandaaronjones.com. I hope that you enjoyed our conversation. If so, please remember to like, share, review and subscribe to this podcast. It really does make a world of difference. The music you hear is taken from my album URRANTA, which is available through my website www.deirdregraham.com, as well as on the usual streaming platforms. Before I go, I'd like to extend my grateful thanks to the Tasgadh Fund from Fèisean and Gàidheal for supporting this series. I look forward to sharing more Gaelic song stories with you, and I hope that you'll join me the next time. Chun an uair sin, beannacht léamh.